The old horse refused to take another step, just as the dry riverbed began to roar. Dust slammed against the truck doors, hot wind howling through the cracked earth, and somewhere beyond the hills, something unseen was moving fast. The woman gripped the wheel, her last belongings rattling behind her, while the ranch hand stood still, watching the horse, not the storm. Because somehow the only thing standing between them and whatever was coming was the one animal no one wanted. By the time the wind turned brown, there was no road left to trust. Maren Whitlock kept both hands locked around the steering wheel of the old pickup, her knuckles pale beneath a film of dust. The truck groaned in the dry wash, its rear tires half buried in sand and broken clay. Behind her, tied down beneath a faded tarp, were 3 boxes of clothes, a dented coffee pot, her husband's old saddle, and a framed photograph she had not been brave enough to look at all morning. That was what remained of the Whitlock place. Not the barns, not the cattle pens, not the kitchen table where 3 generations had bowed their heads before supper, not the south pasture where the grass used to come up green after spring rain. All of that was behind her now, swallowed by drought, bank papers, and silence. Ahead, the wash cut through the land like a scar. "Come on," she whispered, pressing the gas again. The engine coughed, the tires spun. Dust climbed around the truck in a choking cloud. Beside the driver's door, Cal Rourke raised one hand against the wind and stepped back. He was a narrow man in his late 50s, sun-browned and quiet, with the kind of face that looked carved more than aged. He had come to the ranch only 5 days before, asking for work, a place to sleep, and no promises. Maren had nearly turned him away. She had nothing left to give, but he had stayed. And now he stood in the blowing dust, one hand holding the lead rope of dusty blue, the old gray gelding no buyer had wanted. Dusty Blue's ribs showed faintly beneath his dull coat. One eye had a cloudy cast. His mane hung in uneven strings against his neck. He looked like a forgotten thing, something the land had already started to reclaim. Maren had planned to sell him that morning. 20 miles west, a trader had offered just enough cash to cover fuel, feed, and 1 more week of motel rent. It was not fair. It was not kind. But fair and kind had left her ranch long before she did. "Get him moving," Maren called through the open window. Cal did not answer. The old horse stood stiff at the edge of the wash, ears tilted forward, nostrils working in the hot air. He was not looking at the truck. He was not looking at Maren. His gaze was fixed down the dry channel where nothing moved but sheets of dust sliding low over the ground. Maren slapped the steering wheel. "Cal!" This time he looked at her. "We need to get out of this wash," he said. "That is what I am trying to do. Not this way." The words came flat, almost too calm for the weather around them. Maren stared at him, anger rising fast because anger was easier than fear. There is no other way. This is the road. Dusty Blue jerked his head once, pulling the rope tight in Cal's hand. The horse stepped sideways, away from the channel, dragging his hooves toward the higher bank. Cal's eyes narrowed. Maren saw it and hated him for it, hated that patient, listening look. Men who listened too long to land and animals had cost her enough already. Her late husband had trusted seasons that never came, clouds that passed without raining, markets that turned mean overnight. And now here was this ranch hand, watching a half-blind horse like it had something wise to say. "Don't start," she warned. Cal moved closer to the truck window. Dust clung to his eyebrows, to the lines beside his mouth. "That horse does not want to be down here. That horse does not want anything. He's old." "He's old," Cal said. "That's why I'm paying attention." The wind hit harder. The tarp snapped over the boxes in the truck bed. Somewhere far off thunder rolled, but not overhead. It came from the hills, low and buried, like a heavy door being dragged across stone. Maren turned her head. The sky above them was white with heat. No rain, no clouds worth naming, just wind and dust and the cruel, empty shine of afternoon. Still, Dusty Blue shifted again. His front hooves scraped at the bank. He blew hard through his nose, a sharp warning sound that made Cal tighten his grip. Maren opened the door and stepped out into the grit. The wind struck her face so hard it made her eyes water. She climbed down, boots sinking into the powdery wash, and marched toward the horse. We are not standing here because an old gelding got nervous." She reached for the lead rope. Dusty Blue pulled back, not violently, not wildly, just firmly, with the stubborn weight of an animal that had decided the ground ahead was wrong. For 1 second, Maren's hand rested against his dusty neck. Beneath her palm, she felt him trembling, not from weakness, not from fear alone, but from a kind of urgency that traveled through muscle and bone. She had known this horse for 11 years. She had fed him through winters, cursed him through broken fences, ignored him during the worst months of grief. He had carried children at church picnics, pulled loose calves from brush, stood tied for hours without complaint. Dusty Blue had never been dramatic, never difficult. Until now. Cal stepped beside her. "Maren," he said quietly, "look at the cracks." She looked down. The floor of the wash was split open in long, dark lines. Some were dry, some were not. In the deepest seams the clay held a strange shine, damp beneath the dust. Her breath caught before she understood why. Another sound rolled from the hills. This time it was louder. Dusty Blue lifted his head high, ears sharp, body angled toward the slope behind them. The old horse was no longer refusing from fear. He was pointing. Maren turned back to the pickup, her boxes, her saddle, the last pieces of the life she had failed to save. Then she looked at the horse nobody wanted. And for the first time that day, she wondered whether the wrong road was the only thing she had left to lose. The wind carried a smell that did not belong to drought. It slipped through the dust, faint, almost imagined, but once noticed, it would not leave. Not the clean scent of rain, not the promise people waited for. This was heavier, bitter, like wet clay buried under heat. Cal crouched and pressed his fingers into one of the deeper cracks. He did not rush. He did not speak right away. He simply felt the earth as if it might answer him if he gave it time. Maren watched him with a tightening jaw. "We don't have time for guessing," she said. "Whatever you think you feel, it's not a guess." He stood slowly, brushing dry grit from his hand. Water's moving somewhere it shouldn't be. Maren turned in a full circle, scanning the open land. The sky above them was still blank and pale. No clouds, no dark edge on the horizon, no warning that made sense. "You see rain?" she asked. "No." "Then what are we talking about?" Cal lifted his chin toward the distant ridges, barely visible through the haze. "Storm doesn't have to be here to reach us. If it breaks up there—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It comes down here whether we're ready or not." The idea sounded thin against the wide, empty sky. Maren shook her head. "That wash has been dry for months. That's what makes it dangerous. See?" Dusty Blue shifted again, pulling gently but insistently toward the slope. His hooves found the firmer edge of the bank, testing, waiting. Maren exhaled sharply. "So your plan is what? We leave the truck, drag what we can up that ridge, and hope there's nothing out there waiting to kill us slower?" Cal did not answer immediately. He glanced at the pickup, the sagging rear, the tarp snapping loose at one corner. He saw what it meant to her. Not just things, not just weight, memory. "I'm saying," he replied at last, "we don't stay where the ground feels wrong." Maren let out a short, humorless laugh. "Everything feels wrong." A gust hit them sideways, stronger than before. The tarp tore loose on one end and flapped wildly. Maren spun and ran back to the truck, grabbing the edge before it ripped away completely. The rope burned against her palms as she yanked it tight again, tying it with shaking fingers. Inside the bed, one of the boxes had shifted open. Clothes, folded once with care, spilled into the dust. A sleeve caught the wind and fluttered like something alive. Maren climbed up, ignoring the grit that scratched her knees, and shoved everything back inside. She pressed the lid down harder than necessary. She didn't look at the photograph. Cal approached slowly, stopping just short of the tailgate. "You don't have to take it all," he said. She froze. For a moment, the wind seemed to drop out of the world, leaving only the hollow thud of her heartbeat. "This is all I have," she said quietly. Cal nodded. "I know." "No," she snapped, turning on him. "You don't. You showed up with a bag and a story and asked for a place to sleep. That's not the same as watching something disappear, piece by piece, until this—" She gestured sharply at the truck, at the boxes, at the empty land around them. "Is what's left." Cal did not flinch. "I'm not asking you to give it up because it doesn't matter," he said. "I'm asking you to think about what happens if you try to keep it all." Maren held his gaze, anger and something deeper pressing up behind it. Fear, she realized, not of him, of being wrong. Behind them, Dusty Blue let out a low, restless breath. He stepped again toward the bank, then stopped, waiting. Not pulling now, just holding the line taut, like a quiet question. Cal turned slightly, watching the horse. "He's not fighting you," he said. "He's asking you." "For what?" "To move." Another sound rolled across the land. Not thunder this time. Closer, deeper. Maren felt it more than heard it. A vibration under her boots, subtle but unmistakable. She looked down again at the cracked earth. The dark lines seemed wider now, or maybe she was only seeing them differently. Her mouth went dry. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. Cal gave a small, almost sad smile. "Land doesn't care about making sense." The wind shifted again, carrying that same heavy scent, stronger now. Maren looked at the truck, at the rope biting into the tarp, at the boxes that held everything she had refused to leave behind. Then she looked at Dusty Blue. The old horse stood still, patient, his cloudy eye turned toward her, his body angled uphill as if the decision had already been made, just not by her. "If we go up there," she said slowly, "we don't come back for this." Cal met her eyes. "No." "And if you're wrong—" He did not let her finish. "If I'm wrong, we lose time." Maren swallowed. "And if you're right?" Cal glanced once more at the wash behind them. The air seemed to tighten. "Then we lose everything anyway," he said. "Just faster." The words settled between them, heavy and final. Dusty Blue shifted his weight, one step higher onto the bank, then another, not pulling, not forcing, waiting. Maren's fingers loosened from the tailgate. For the first time since the drought had taken hold, since the papers had come, since she had started counting what could be saved and what had to be left behind, she hesitated. Not because she didn't know what she wanted, but because she finally understood what it would cost. She climbed down from the truck slowly. The wind caught her hair, whipping it across her face as she walked toward the horse. Her hand hovered over the rope. And for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. She could not bring herself to choose. The rope felt heavier than it should have. Maren wrapped it once around her hand, then again, as if tightening her grip might quiet the noise in her chest. Dust clawed at her eyes, her throat, her thoughts. The world had narrowed to three things: the truck behind her, the slope ahead, and the old horse standing between both. "Say it," she murmured, though she wasn't sure to whom. Cal didn't answer. He didn't move. He only watched her, the way a man watches a door he knows cannot be opened for someone else. Maren closed her eyes for a second, just a second, and saw the kitchen window from her old house, the way the light used to fall across the table in the early morning, the chair her husband never pushed in, the crack in the wall she always meant to fix. She opened her eyes before the memory could settle. "Fine," she said, the words scraping out of her. "We don't stay here." Cal nodded once, nothing more. They worked quickly after that, not because they were sure, but because hesitation had become its own kind of danger. Cal untied the loose corner of the tarp and pulled free a smaller bag, handing it to her. Maren climbed into the truck bed one last time, her movements sharp, mechanical. She didn't think about what she chose: a canteen, a blanket, a small tin box that held documents she didn't trust herself to lose. Her hand hovered over the photograph, and then pulled back. Not because it didn't matter, because it mattered too much. "Leave it," Cal said quietly, not looking at her. "I know." She jumped down, boots hitting the cracked ground harder than necessary. The truck creaked behind her, settling deeper into the wash as if the earth had already claimed it. Dusty Blue moved the moment she stepped beside him. Not fast, not urgent, certain. He climbed the bank with slow, deliberate steps, choosing each patch of ground as though he had walked this path before. Cal followed close behind, one hand near the rope but not pulling. Maren came last, the bag slung over her shoulder, her eyes refusing to look back. The climb was steeper than it had seemed from below. Loose soil shifted underfoot, dry grass snapped beneath their boots. Twice Maren slipped, catching herself on the rough edge of stone. Each time Dusty Blue paused, waiting until she steadied before moving again. The wind changed as they rose. Down in the wash it had been chaotic, spinning, blinding. Up here it pressed in one direction, hot and relentless, as if something large were pushing through the land behind them. Halfway up, Maren stopped, not because she was tired, because she couldn't help it. She turned. The truck sat below them, small now, half hidden by the rising dust. For a heartbeat, it looked harmless. Just an old vehicle stuck in a dry channel. Nothing to fear, nothing to abandon. Her throat tightened. I could still... A sound cut her off, low, rolling. Not thunder, not exactly. Cal's head snapped toward the hills. Dusty Blue stiffened beside him, ears pinned forward, every line of his body suddenly alert. "Keep moving," Cal said, sharper now. Maren didn't argue this time. They climbed the last stretch in silence, breath and grit mixing in their lungs. When they reached the ridge, the ground leveled just enough to stand without slipping. Dusty Blue stepped forward onto firmer soil, then stopped, turning slightly as if to check them. Maren followed his gaze. At first she saw nothing, just the wash, the truck, the same empty land she had been staring at all morning. Then the color changed. A darker line appeared at the far end of the channel, where the land dipped between two ridges. It moved strangely, too smooth for wind, too heavy for dust. The line thickened, spread, and then it came. Water, not clear, not gentle. A wall of brown, churning force, dragging branches, mud, and debris in a violent surge that filled the wash in seconds. It hit the bend where the truck was trapped and folded around it, rising, swallowing, tearing at metal and wood like it weighed nothing at all. Maren didn't breathe. The sound reached them a moment later, a deep, rushing roar that seemed to come from inside the earth itself. Her knees went weak. The truck shifted once, twice, and then was gone, not broken, not wrecked. Gone, carried away in a violent rush of water that had not existed a minute before. Maren staggered back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. The bag slipped from her shoulder and hit the ground unnoticed. Everything she had refused to leave, everything she had believed she could still hold on to, vanished in a single breath. Beside her, Dusty Blue stood still, not triumphant, not proud, just present. Cal exhaled slowly, his eyes never leaving the flood below. "That's why he wouldn't go," he said. Maren lowered her hand, her fingers trembling. She looked at the horse, the dull coat, the clouded eye, the steady, unshaken stance. For the first time she saw him without judgment, not as a burden, not as a mistake, but as something she had almost walked past, and paid for with everything. The roar of the water filled the space where her past had been. And as the flood continued to carve through the land, Maren felt something inside her break loose, not like loss, not like grief, something quieter, something that made room. She swallowed hard, her voice barely steady. "We would have been down there." Cal nodded. Dusty Blue shifted his weight, turning his head away from the wash and toward the open land beyond the ridge. Maren followed his gaze. For the first time since the ranch, since the papers, since the long road out, there was no map in her mind, no plan, no direction she trusted, only a horizon she did not know, and a path she had not chosen. Until now. She picked up the bag slowly. Her hand found the rope again, and this time she did not hesitate. "All right," she said, her voice rough but clear. "Show me where we go next." The land beyond the ridge did not welcome them. It stretched wide and pale, a patchwork of brittle grass and hard-packed soil that cracked under every step. No fences, no tracks, no sign that anyone had chosen this place before them, just heat, distance, and the quiet threat of running out of both strength and water before anything changed. Dusty Blue moved first. Not with urgency, not with fear, but with a quiet steadiness that felt almost deliberate. He angled slightly north, away from the wash, away from the path Maren would have taken on her own. His pace was slow, measured, conserving something she could not yet name. Cal walked beside him, watching without touching the rope. Maren followed a step behind. For the first mile, she said nothing. Her body moved, but her mind lingered somewhere else, down in that churning wash where the last pieces of her old life had disappeared. She could still hear the roar of water in her ears, still see the way the truck had vanished without resistance. She had thought losing the ranch was the worst of it. She had been wrong. This had been the last thread, and now it was gone. Her foot caught on a ridge of dry soil, and she stumbled forward. Cal reached out instinctively, but she waved him off before he could steady her. "I'm fine." He didn't argue. The silence stretched again, broken only by the crunch of boots and the soft, steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. Time slowed into something thicker, harder to measure. Minutes felt like miles. Then Dusty Blue stopped. Not abruptly, just stopped. His head lowered slightly. His ears shifted, turning towards something Maren could not hear. Cal stepped closer, his eyes scanning the ground ahead. "What is it?" Maren asked, her voice hoarse from dust. Cal didn't answer right away. He crouched, brushing aside the brittle grass with the back of his hand. The soil beneath looked no different at first, dry, pale, lifeless. Then he pressed his palm against it, held it there, and smiled, just barely. "There's moisture under this," he said. Maren frowned. "It looks dead." "Top always does." He reached for the small canteen at his belt, poured a thin line of water onto the ground. It sank almost immediately, disappearing into the soil without pooling. "This land hasn't given up," he added. Maren stared at the spot. For days, weeks, everything she had seen had pointed to one truth. Nothing was left to save. Not the crops, not the cattle, not the future she had planned. And yet here, in the middle of nowhere, a patch of earth was quietly holding on to something unseen. She let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Dusty Blue shifted again, stepping forward, then veering slightly off the line they had been walking. Cal followed, this time with a bit more purpose. "Where is he taking us?" Maren asked. "Somewhere better than where we were," Cal replied. It wasn't comfort, but it wasn't empty either. They walked on. The sun dipped lower, turning the land into long shadows and dull gold. The heat softened just enough to let their bodies breathe. Maren's steps grew steadier, less reactive, more intentional. She began to notice things. The way Dusty Blue paused before choosing ground. The way he avoided certain patches, stepping over cracks that looked no different from the rest. The way he angled towards slight dips in the land, where the air felt just a fraction cooler. "This isn't random," she said quietly. Cal glanced back at her. "No. He's done this before." "Maybe not here," Cal said, "but somewhere like it." Maren looked at the horse, really looked this time, not at the ribs, not at the dull coat, not at the age, at the way he moved. There was no hesitation in him now, no confusion, no wandering. Just memory, not of a place, of a way to survive. They crested a small rise just as the light began to fade. Below them, the land changed. It wasn't green, not yet, but the soil darkened in uneven patches, and a cluster of low shrubs held leaves that hadn't fully dried out. At the far edge of the dip, a narrow line cut through the earth, too shallow to be a stream, too deliberate to be chance. Cal let out a quiet breath. "That's runoff." Maren stepped forward, her pulse quickening. "Water?" "Sometimes," he said. "Enough, if you know where to look." Dusty Blue began to descend without waiting. Maren followed, faster now, the exhaustion in her limbs pushed aside by something new, not hope, not yet, but direction. At the bottom, Cal knelt again, digging with his hands near the edge of the shallow line. The soil gave way easier here. Dampness surfaced just beneath the top layer. He leaned back, wiping his hands on his jeans. "This'll hold us," he said. Maren stood still for a long moment. Not because she doubted him, because she was trying to understand what had just happened. A horse she had planned to sell for almost nothing had led them here, not by accident, not by luck, by something she had never thought to value. She walked over to Dusty Blue slowly. He lifted his head as she approached, his cloudy eye catching what little light remained. Up close, he looked the same as he always had, tired, worn, imperfect, but not empty. Maren reached out. This time her hand did not hover. It rested against his neck, fingers sinking into the coarse hair, feeling the steady warmth beneath. "All right," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Her grip on the rope loosened. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was holding him in place. It felt like she was holding on to something that had chosen to stay. The sky darkened fully, stretching into a quiet, endless night. Cal began gathering what little they had, setting up a place to rest. Maren didn't move right away. She stood beside the horse, listening, not to the wind, not to the land, to the silence that followed survival. And in that silence, a question began to take shape. If everything she had lost had led her here, what exactly had she been trying so hard to keep? She looked down at the ground beneath her feet, dark, damp, alive in a way she hadn't seen in months. Then she looked at the horse, and for the first time she wondered if the thing she thought was her last burden might be the only reason she still had a future at all. Morning arrived without ceremony. No bird song, no soft breeze. Just a slow, pale light spreading across the land, as if the sun itself were unsure whether this place deserved another day. The air was cooler than it had been in weeks, carrying a faint dampness that lingered close to the ground. Maren opened her eyes to the sound of quiet movement. Not wind, not fear, just the steady, familiar rhythm of something alive. Dusty Blue stood a few yards away, his head lowered, grazing what little he could find among the stubborn patches of green. Cal was already awake, crouched near the shallow runoff line, deepening the small hollow he had started the night before. Maren pushed herself upright, her muscles stiff, her throat dry, but not desperate. Not anymore. She walked toward them slowly, taking in the space with new eyes. It wasn't much, a dip in the land, a line where water sometimes passed, a place most people would overlook without a second thought. But it had held, and for now that was enough. Cal didn't look up when she approached. "Ground's softer here," he said, pressing his hand into the soil. "We can catch what little comes through. Won't be much, but it'll last longer than dry air." Maren nodded, though he couldn't see it. She crouched beside him, running her fingers over the earth. It was still rough, still reluctant, but beneath the surface there was resistance. A quiet refusal to give up entirely. She understood that feeling. For a long moment neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to prove, only what remained. Behind them, Dusty Blue lifted his head and turned slightly, watching them. Not expectant, not demanding. Just present, the way he had been through all of it. Maren stood and walked toward him. He didn't move away, didn't step forward either. He simply waited. The rope hung loose in her hand. She looked down at it, at the worn fibers that had once been a measure of control, something to guide, to hold, to lead. Now it felt different, lighter, less like a tool, more like a choice. She reached up and slid the loop from around his neck. The movement was simple, quiet, unceremonious. But it carried more weight than anything she had done in months. Dusty Blue blinked once, adjusting his stance as the pressure disappeared. For a second he stood exactly where he was, as if nothing had changed. Then he took a step. Not away, not toward, just free. Maren let the rope fall to her side. Cal watched from a distance, saying nothing. There was nothing to say. "You don't have to stay," she murmured, her voice barely above the morning stillness. Dusty Blue flicked an ear. He lowered his head again and returned to grazing, slow and steady, as if the idea of leaving had never crossed his mind. Maren exhaled softly, not relief, not quite, something steadier. She turned back toward the shallow line in the earth where Cal had begun shaping a small basin to catch what water might come. Without asking, she knelt beside him and started clearing away loose soil with her hands. The work was slow, uncertain, but real. Time passed without being counted. The sun climbed higher, warming the ground, drying the edges of what little moisture they had found. Still, they worked, adjusting, shaping, preparing for something that might not come. Because sometimes preparing was all that remained. By midday, the hollow had deepened enough to hold a small pool when water returned. It wasn't much. It wouldn't change the world. But it could hold a life. Maren sat back on her heels, brushing dirt from her hands. She looked out across the land, not with the sharp, measuring eyes she had carried for months, but with something quieter. Acceptance, not of loss, of reality. "You ever think," she said slowly, "that maybe we weren't meant to hold on to all of it?" Cal leaned back slightly, considering. "I think," he replied, "sometimes we don't know what matters until something takes the rest." Maren nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. Behind them, Dusty Blue shifted his weight, stepping closer without being called. He stood just within reach, his presence steady, unchanged by the choice she had made. Maren reached out, resting her hand lightly against his neck. No rope, no expectation. Just contact, the kind that didn't demand anything in return. In the distance, a thin line of clouds gathered along the horizon, faint, uncertain, but real. Maren watched them for a long moment. Not with hope. Not yet. But with something close enough to begin again. She stood, wiping her hands on her jeans, and looked at the small patch of land that now held them. It wasn't the ranch. It wasn't the life she had built. But it was not nothing. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, that felt like enough. Sometimes what we call nothing is the only thing keeping us alive. Maren didn't save her past. She learned what was worth carrying forward. And the horse no one wanted didn't change her life with power, but with truth. If this story stayed with you, there are more journeys like this waiting, quiet, real, and worth hearing.
If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Horse Heart Healing for more stories like this.